child, whether it's my bar mitzvah, my wedding, whatever, unless there was kishka, that event was not going to take place. And so far I've been successful.
That's right. For the last 20 years, he hasn't had any kishka.
I haven't had any events.
And he hasn't been present.
Nobody's wanted to have an event with me. But, you know, I want, and by the way, anything that comes from this person, I want you to know it's coming from somebody who's been kicked in the head. Look at this head. It doesn't look like a head.
Independent,
kicked.
I claim
This is a head that's been
independent confirmation. Me in the head.
Well, Harvey, it's hard to imagine what you are anyway.
Someone get that man a lawyer.
Well, the real facts of the matter are that I was about 20. Harvey was 40.
Be so rich, lad.
He wanted food
I'm not going to
unreasonable.
touch anything.
And I tried to calm him down, and he became very demanding and declared that he was no longer going to accept orders from me. And he took off his glasses and put them down and prepared to fight. And I begged him not to do it. Don't do it, let's not fight. He came at me, and I hit him once. He fell unconscious to the floor. He had had a concussion, he was out cold. My mother arrived, saw him there, it was Chosha in the room. Anyway, Harvey did wind up in the emergency room at Western Hospital because he had been unconscious for more than a minute. And the rule is, if you're unconscious for more than a minute, you get admitted to the hospital for observation. So he was admitted to the hospital. I happened to be a student at that hospital at that time. So I had to give the history of what happened to this guy and why he was unconscious. I was a student in that it was a very embarrassing situation.
Did you mention that you kicked him in the head in the hospital?
The whole business about the kicked in the head is Harvey's explanation of why he is the failure that he is.
The truth of the matter is that, unfortunately, our family for many, many generations has suffered from the kick in the head syndrome. You know, many, many Heckers over the years have been kicked in the head. Apparently, it hasn't done a great deal of damage, but, you know, with some exceptions.
Well, actually, this case was so serious that it came to trial. In 1992, there was a retreat at Harvey's cottage, and the case was brought up before lawyers. I think Joel was the chief attorney at that time, and we were having a reunion of the family, the Hecker side of the family. There were about 100 people there. We were in the cottage. The trial was interrupted by an unusual incident. A bat entered this big room, and the bat was flying around near the ceiling, and Joel got up on a tall ladder and was trying to catch the bat for a while. And in any case, the trial, despite that interruption, did come to a conclusion, and there was a vote from the audience. And there was a terrible, gross miscarriage of justice. They found me guilty, and they were wrong. I want you all to know that.
The trouble is, we couldn't find a jury of his peers because he doesn't have any peers. Nobody wants to claim that they are the same as him.
After listening to that evidence, even the bat thought that you were guilty.
Well, the bat cast the deciding vote.
Yeah. Well, you know.
But his mother didn't.
The truth of the matter is that it was an inappropriate verdict. That Sid should not have been found guilty of giving Harvey a kick in the head. Should have been found guilty of giving him 2 kicks in the head.
One at the house and one in the hospital. Because I forgot about the one in the hospital.
The reason that right now it's not evidence on one side of his head, this was the original kick in the head. That's okay, got kicked on this side. They both look alike. They both had exactly the same kick.
You notice he wears his yarmulke over to one side, it covers the whole. Let me tell you about how Jack and I were grown up. When we were grown up, Jack was always bigger than me, and as siblings we were fighting quite a bit. But I was wiry and fast, and I could run around and kind of jab at him, and so I could always beat him up, because I was just running around. Till finally, he's a little slower than I am. He's slower than most people. Nevertheless,
he's just
he finally, by accident once, here's what happened, and that
tell you when you're stuck with Jack,
just a minute, Jack. By accident once, he won a fight, and what happened was, I'm running around, I'm hitting him, and so I hit him enough that he was weak. He fell down, but he fell on me. And so there he is, he's like twice my size, and he's on me, and I couldn't move. I don't think he figured it out, but I never picked on him again after that.
Well, you know, and I was sitting on it, I was so happy at that moment that finally I was victorious. I was sitting atop, I turned to my mother and I said, "Do you have any kishka?" But we had a lot of, it was difficult growing up. You know,
Yes, you haven't managed it yet.
that's right. It was very difficult growing up. We all had to work. We had interesting jobs. We all sold door to door, and there were an awful lot of experiences that we had doing that. We did that for years. We knocked on
In
doors.
fact, on some of those occasions, when they were selling door to door, they attacked their customers.
Well, we shouldn't talk about that, but I will tell you that we were frequently arrested. It wasn't always fair, and I'll tell you one story. Jack and I were with a sales crew, and we were taken out in an old VW Bug, they were called the Bug those days, and we were about 15 years old, 14, 15 years old, and we were out in some town in southern
Ivy,
Ontario.
the town was Ivy.
Well, at any rate, so we were out there, and at any rate, let me start the story by saying, at some point, I'm running down the street as fast as I can,
Oh, that was,
and,
go ahead.
well, maybe I'll tell a different story.
That
All right,
was
so I'll tell you a
Rosedale.
story, I'll tell a story about how all of us were rounded up and taken to a police station. This was in a different town.
Not all of us.
The four of us.
Just, yeah.
Jack and I and the two other people who were in this little sales crew. And this was a small town. I think there were a total of 3 policemen and 3 police cars. And that they were spread out looking for the 4 boys who were selling in that town. And they collected us all at this little police station. And it turned out, no, we had been selling magazine subscriptions to Ladies' Home Journal, I believe. And it turned out that without knowing it, I had sold a magazine subscription to the mayor's wife. I didn't know it was the mayor's wife, but
And
I
she
would have
couldn't
sold her
read.
anyways.
I mean, that was the problem.
Well, to make a long story short, we were all collected in this police station because when the mayor found out about it, he said, "Arrest them all, bring them to a police station." We all arrive at the police station, and the police are saying to us, "Okay, now who has the $10? You sold this $10 subscription to the mayor's wife?" No, nobody knew anything about it. We had no idea. No, not us. Well, after they let us go, and they said, "Get out of town, don't come back."
They tortured me for half an hour.
We left
They
town.
wouldn't let him eat any kishka.
We left town, and then Jack says, "So I want to know, who does have the $10? And I said, "I do." He said, "Well, where is it?" And I said, "I put it under my shoe."
I'll tell you a story of when, another case of my older brother, who was supposed to be my role model, who eventually became a doctor. I don't know how that ever happened. How he abused me when we were selling. He claims, there were 2 hotel rooms, there were 4 guys, there were 3 pre-med students, and I was still in high school. And one evening, my brother and another guy went out, they were going to do an experiment to see how liquor, alcohol affects the actions. My brother was going to be the note taker, and the other guy was going to drink liquor. In any event, by the time the experiment was an hour old, the other guy was under the influence. They came back to the hotel room. I was lying fast
That's
asleep.
the other guy.
I was lying fast asleep, and the other guy, with my brother in attendance, decided to flip coins to see if he could hit me in the eye. You can imagine, this brute was a witness, and he gave this other guy an incentive. He said that, "Hit my brother in the eye, and I will bribe you tomorrow. I'll pay for breakfast." That's the story of my brother, my older brother, who was looking after me. So, do you know why I wear glasses today? Because I was nearly blind. First he kicked me in the head, that's in the kitchen. Then he kicked me in the head in the hospital, and then he tried to blind me.
First of all, the whole thing is a lie. Completely wrong. I threw a plum in his eye. It wasn't a coin. So he thinks that that fact is wrong, and the rest of it is questionable. But I'll tell you a story of selling. In the summertime, I used to go out with others to sell things, and when I was in first year medical school, 4 of us, all medical students, needed a car to go and start selling in the province of Ontario. one of us was a veteran of the war, and so he was the oldest one. We sent him to buy the car because he had the most experience. We each put in $225, and he came back with a 1941 Dodge, which we thought was terrific. And we got in that car, and we drove it about 20 miles to Oshawa, where one of us had an uncle, and we visited the uncle. When we came out and started the engine, black clouds of smoke came out of the back end of the car. And clearly something was slightly wrong there, and that we were informed that someone had doctored the engine and put some oil or grease in it, and this is what was burning that stuff up, and basically the car was a wreck. However, despite the fact that it was a wreck, and the guy who bought the car disappeared the first day, he was too ashamed, he didn't come back. The rest of us continued all that summer driving the car. Now, the car wasn't a complete wreck. I want to describe to you what it was like. The driver's side window didn't work. So that meant if it was raining, I would have to turn the car around and drive in the other direction. Or if the wind was blowing from the wrong way, that also didn't work.
You heard how I got sick with that cigar when we were driving back. What do you think happened? We went a quarter of a mile this way, a quarter of a mile that way, a quarter of a mile this way, a quarter of a mile. I said, are we getting there yet?
Well, I have to tell you that really before we went out on the road, we drove the car to a garage, and as the car approached the garage, the mechanic came running out waving his arms at us, saying, don't come in, don't come in. And so we left the car parked right at the entrance to the garage, and he said, we wanted him to tell us what was wrong and what it would take to fix it. We went away for an hour. We came back and said, well, what does the car need? He said, it needs an engine. So we said, we couldn't put in an engine. So we drove the car for 3,000 miles that summer without an engine. But also, it didn't have a window.
But they saved a lot on gas.
We saved
He thinks that, who do you think was pulling that car? Talk about older brother abuse. I'm pulling that car 3,000 miles. Do you think they gave me $1?
Well, you know what?
It's not
Anybody who
true.
would pull
Harvey
the car
was
for
driving
3,000 miles, there have to be some questions about the intelligence of that mule. But anyway, I want you to know the car did not have any brakes. That was another problem. And you have to remember that anything I say, it might be true, it might not. What we had was an anchor. So if the car was...
What would you need brakes if your car doesn't have an engine?
I would throw out the anchor. It was very easy to do. There was no window. Just throw the anchor out and it would stop the car. But we had a little trouble getting the anchor back into the car sometimes. But that really wasn't too bad. The car also had a leak in the radiator. So I used to have to fill it. We would drive around with jugs of water, and every few miles you'd have to pour a few jugs of water into the radiator.
Sid,
But in addition, since we had no engine, we had to have another form of power, and he lied. He was not pulling the car. We hoisted a sail. The sail took that car with wind power 3,000 miles that summer. Now I ask you, which of us is the liar?
but Sid, if you were slightly more intelligent about it, you would have spent $25 and bought a horse to pull the car.
Why would I need a horse? I had Jack.
You know, Irv and I, well, Harvey and Sid went out selling, and Irv and I used to do it. And I was much more successful than Irv was, and one of the reasons, of course, was we would go to a town to sell, and there were 4 of us, we would each take a section of the town. But dogs loved Irv. They loved to chase him, they loved to bite him, they loved to jump on him. So we would drop Irv off, and it was only a question of time, half an hour, 45 minutes, an hour before a dog would discover Irv was there, and they'd start barking and chasing him. Irv was terrified, he was being bitten every single day, and he would run. And then usually, halfway through the day, we would go looking for Irv. We would want to have lunch. And if he wasn't there, we know, okay, he's run out of town. We get to drive out to the edge of the town, and we usually find Irv sitting on a bridge somewhere. But one of the reasons I was more successful than Irv was Irv just didn't get that much time knocking on doors. He was too busy running from dogs.
I'll tell you what I did. When we were selling, and we were working in the summertime in these small villages, nobody had their door closed, but they all had screens to keep the flies out. The dogs would come running out and bang against the screen door. The door would open and they'd come running out. And I just put my foot up against the
No, wait a minute.
screen door.
Wait.
And when the dog hit that screen door, the door did not open.
Wait 1 minute. I thought that's what I did. You did that?
Everybody learns from me,
Irv,
Jerry.
did you do that?
They're a little confused. You know, I love my brothers, but understand, once again, it's not that
Quit while you're ahead.
they're not untruthful. But do you know what nourishkeit is? The nonsense? A lot of their truth is nonsense. So forgive them.
I'll tell you, over the years, I can only talk for myself personally, I spent so much time listening to this mishigas, this nonsensical garbage. I don't know what is right and what is true and what isn't true. I don't know what I did.
I've been telling you that for years.
I don't know. Who was it? Was Harvey kicked in the head or was I kicked in the head? Or did I kick Sid in the head? I don't know anymore. Somebody got kicked in the head.
Jack, who are you?
I have no idea. No idea.
On that note, maybe we should stop. Who the hell are these guys?
Well, I know who I am, okay?
I know who you are, too.
You know, we haven't even brought up the question of
You're the guy,
imposters.
I saw your face on that wanted poster. One of those towns when they were running.
I'm the guy who cries every night because I got kicked in the head.
This is the guy, I'd pick up at the end of the day, we'd pick him up, sell it, and he'd have a dog hanging from his shirt.
I still want to hear how Irv was attacking his customers.
I don't know that you want to hear all these stories, but there were some incidences when I felt some of my customers were not very nice, and so I returned the favor.
I would like to tell one from my perspective, and it's the running down the street in the Rosedale story.
Okay. But remember that if you don't like what you hear, it probably wasn't true.
Rosedale's a pretty expensive area of Toronto. They have big houses, and we picked a pretty good street, expensive street to sell on. Irv took one side of the street, I took the other, and we started knocking on doors. Well, I got way ahead of him. He fell way behind. So usually we could see each other across the street. Now, all of a sudden, I heard a yelling and screaming. I was walking from one house to another. I was walking in a sidewalk. I heard a yelling and a screaming, and I looked around, and Irv was running towards me up the middle of the street, yelling and screaming. He was running as fast as he could. What was he? He was saying, "Run, run!" As he went by me, I had a tendency not to run. It was difficult for me to run. I'd eaten a lot of kishka. And he was yelling, "Run, run, run!" So I started running. I didn't know, so I started following him. Anyways, we ran about halfway down the block, and he ducked between two houses. He went down the side of two houses. I ran after him, and he was huffing and puffing. I said, "Irv, what are we running from?"
Well, let me
And
tell
all
the
of a
story.
sudden, I heard a police siren. And I knew what we were running from. It took Irv about half an hour to catch his breath and tell me the story. Go ahead, Irv.
Well, the story was, and I'll tone it down a little bit, but I knocked on a door, because this was door-to-door selling, and it was a screen door. And a woman opened up the door and immediately slammed it in my face. And at first I was a little startled. I thought it was kind of rude, but I had been trained by my sales mavens, and you don't give up that easily, so I knocked on the door again because I wanted to explain all about what we were selling, which may have been pots and pans or some local newspaper at that time. But at any rate, I knocked on the door again. This time, she opens the door, and there's a screen door that's still between this woman and myself, but she came to the door with a glass of water. She threw it through the screen door on me. So she threw a glass of water at me, and I was soaked from water. And so I was slightly perturbed about that, and it happened that in the front of this house there was a spigot, there was a tap, and nearby was a bucket. And so I thought I'd return a favor. So I picked up the bucket. And except the only thing that was different is this time when I went back, I opened the screen door, and then I knocked on the door. She opened the door, and I looked. And then I turned and ran, and I saw Jack. I said, "Run, run, run!" Now, we escaped prison that time.
I remember on one occasion we were in a small town, and I wasted about an hour. I went to a nunnery. What is it called? I spent an hour trying to talk some nuns into buying a magazine subscription. I wasn't successful. I don't know.
Well, it was Playboy. What do you
That was Ladies' Home Journal.
Unsuccessful. In any case, all in all, we had a rough upbringing, and our nourishment at home. My mother was a unique cook. She was excellent at some things. For some reason, Sid has never liked fat. He never ate anything with butter, anything that had cream cheese in it, anything that had fat in it. And my mother used to bake things that were hard as a rock. She would make a cake, or she would make dishes, whatever. There was no fat in it. It was hard as a rock, so Sid loved it.
I did.
But he was the only human, I think.
I love it. She made the best cheesecake in the world. It was terrific. I've never been able to find anything as good as that cheesecake was.
That cheesecake was also a good hammer.
My mother,
I used it for shoes.
one day a piece of that cheesecake fell on my foot. I was in a cast for 3 weeks.
My mother made, as a matter of fact, knishes that were the shape of hockey pucks, and they had the consistency, the hardness of a hockey puck. But Sid liked it.
I loved it.
I don't. He liked it.
Talk about taste. My brother Sid. I think what really happened is that he was under such pressure from my mother because he was going to be the doctor. And who were we? We were just the 3 boys. We were going to trail after him. And Sid had to carry that through the rest of his life. So what did he do? He became a specialist. Became a specialist in what? Internal medicine. So what does an internal medicine guy do? He has to look down your throat. You know the sticks that they use? The spatulas? Well, that's to look at your tongue. But if you want to look down somebody's throat, you've got to use a spatula about this big. Now, my brother, trying to insert these spatulas, sometimes got his arm stuck inside. He has teeth marks. That's why he always wears that shirt, which, by the way, came from Goodwill, which you can just earlier today. Not only did that shirt come from Goodwill, but if you look closely, you'll see it isn't even made out of whole cloth. This shirt has holes in it. It's not full. It's just half a shirt. I don't understand why Goodwill would take it. And I finally came to the conclusion, he didn't give it to the Goodwill. He bought it from Goodwill. That's where he got it.
I would like to go back for a moment to the serious note, and I'll make it very brief, and that is, it really is a fact that the 4 of us have gotten along very well, and that we're close. And I think about the reasons for that, and the bottom line is, I think, first of all, my father died when we were young, and I think that there was some paternalism shown by the older brothers, and we all had to kind of hold together in order to survive. But beyond that, we lived within 2 or 3 blocks of dozens, if not hundreds, of relatives, cousins, uncles, aunts, and there was a sense in growing up in those days, and I hope I see a lot of it here. There was a sense that you really couldn't be alone, that cousins, even if you didn't like those cousins or uncles and aunts, that they were there for you. That was just something you kind of understood. And I think with all of us, I think we picked that up, and we picked up also that my father was held in great admiration and very much loved in the community. We heard this for 50 years after his death. We continued to hear it. And people who had known him. And he had done a lot of good and helped a lot of people. And I think that we benefited from those experiences and that kind of family life of sort of knowing that there's always people around.
I think it's true that when my father died, Harvey and Sidney, in effect, became the fathers of me and Irv. So they were brothers, but at the same time, the 2 of them were looking after us. And I don't know that ever ended. I mean, how many brothers would teach a younger brother how to eat toast? Who would do that? I mean, why would a brother do that?
Because the brother wasn't smart enough to figure it out by himself.
I'm sure he could have found something more important to teach me in 68 years. The last 68 years, you taught me how to eat toast. Thank you very much.
I was afraid to teach him how to eat a bagel. He'd eat it all around and look for what was in the middle.
If I hadn't found fish, I would have started by now.
I want to point out that Harvey didn't teach everything to Jack. Jack and Irv have certain talents that Harvey and I do not have. But Harvey is especially deficient. So that, I mean, for example, there were some years when Jack lived in California and Harvey was in Toronto, and Harvey one day had a problem in the house that he couldn't solve. And so he telephoned Jack in California and asked him to come quickly to Toronto because Harvey was having trouble hanging a picture. And he needed someone who could hammer that nail. And Jack, of course, was an expert maven with high-tech hammers.
Harvey had more talent than he thought he had. By the time I got to Toronto, I noticed the picture was already hung not perfectly. I said, Harvey, just turn it around, it's backwards, and it'll be fine.
The reason it was hung, first of all, was because my friend Jim Levine sitting over here, he was a fixer-upper. I couldn't fix anything, Jim would come in, and in fairness to him, he put the picture front to back, but he's colorblind. So he didn't notice the difference between the back and the front.
Well, you know, Harvey, I'll tell you something. I had a discussion with Jimmy about that picture, and you've told that story on a number of occasions, and Jimmy denies it. As a matter of fact, he said he'd like to give you a kick in the head.
I think there should be a sequel to this sometime. I think that this is a rare pleasure, I think, for the four of us. First of all, we always like to be with each
Speak
other.
for yourself.
We always love to be with each other, despite what Jack is saying. And we generally do have a very good time with each other. And we want to thank you all for inviting us so that we can be together, also with this wonderful company and this terrific family of Gordon and Donna's that absolutely take your breath away with their abilities and their talents and how well they all did today. And I think we're the ones who have to thank you very much.
I'd like to say also that, you know, it's an absolute pleasure for me to be here at this moment. Not so much because of my brother, but because of the Kishkin. Marvelous piece of Kishkin.
Gordon, where's the talent scout? I'm still looking for the talent scout.
Jack, take another bite.
I never have to be asked.
Can we get a picture of all of you standing together?